of UK Finance's Regulatory Roadmap series. I am Oge Odense, Principal Cybersecurity at UK Finance. As you all know, this series aims to brief UK Finance members on the latest updates in regulatory thinking for 2021, as well as to deep dive on the latest regulatory issues and changes that are occurring in some of our key focus areas. The full list of topics being covered can be found on our website at ukfinance.org.uk, and we encourage you to join as many sessions as are relevant to you and to alert your colleagues to any sessions that fall within their areas of interest. All sessions will be available on demand for a short period, so please do circle back to watch these as they become available if you haven't already. Our topic for today's briefing is cyber transformation. And in association with PA Consulting, we will be discussing our understanding of cyber trends in financial services, cyber as an enabler, and much more. We're excited to have you with us today, and we hope you've come ready with your question for our expert panel. But before I introduce and hand over to our panel, I would like to quickly cover up some housekeeping items. Within the auditorium, your media stream would appear on the left-hand side. You can resize the screen by clicking on the arrows located on the right of this window. Here, you can also control the volume or make it a full screen. If you're having issues with accessing the media stream, please click on the Test Your Connection button or Wi-Fi symbol at the bottom of the page. And note, Google Chrome or Firefox are the recommended browsers for watching our webinars. And having other applications such as Microsoft Teams may disrupt your access. So we highly recommend that you close these where possible. Any additional resources can be found under the resource tab within the auditorium. We also encourage you to complete the survey within this area to help us gather valuable feedback. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can submit this using the Q&A tool on the right side of the auditorium. Please note that when you ask a question, your name is not disclosed to other webinar attendees. And finally, if you're having technical difficulties during the webinar, please use the Q&A tool to contact the team at UK Finance. They are here on hand to help you resolve any issues. Now back to the reason we're here. Joining me today, I am delighted to welcome a panel of cyber industry experts. And first, I would like to welcome Elliot Rose, who is the head of digital trust and cybersecurity at PA Consulting. Elliot, please introduce yourself.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Delighted to be here today. As just highlighted, I lead globally cybersecurity for PA and with a special focus on financial services.
Thanks, Elliot. We also have Cate Pye, who is the head of cyber transformation at PA Consulting. To you, Cate.
Thanks, Ogie. Hi, Cate Pye. I lead cyber transformation and government cyber at PA. Delighted to be here.
And last but not least, we have Nicola O'Connor, who is the Chief Information Security and IT Risk Officer at AIB.
Thanks, Ogie. Delighted to be here. Yes, my title is exactly that in terms of cybersecurity and IT risk management. And I'm working in one of the major banks here in the Irish market with a small presence in the UK.
Thanks, Nicola. We're definitely looking forward to the conversations today. And please, if you do have questions, like I mentioned, use the Q&A tool. We're going to get into them just at the right time. To kick us off today, I would like to hand over to Elliot.
Great, thank you very much, Guy. And I think we've got a poll to start with. I think we're going to launch a poll and ask you to vote on a question we have for you. I'm not sure if we can display that now.
Yes. So everyone, you have received a poll. Please respond accordingly. Thank you.
This is for question 1. Yes, please.
Yes.
So we'll give you a moment to read that and then to respond back to it. Okay, if everybody's had a chance. I'm not sure the results have come in yet. I think we've got somebody who's going to report back on the results for us.
Yeah, the results are still coming in.
They're still coming in. Okay.
Yeah, we'll give it a few more minutes. So we asked the question, how much of your organizational growth is based on digital routes to market and new technology? And we have options of all, the majority, some, not much, and none. So far, we have 8.4% saying all. We have 54% 12.2% saying the majority. We have 28.9% saying some, and we have 7.2% saying not that much, and 1.2% saying none.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, thank you very much for voting on that. I think it's quite interesting. It sort of sets the context for the presentation today in terms of the impact of cyber transformation on the businesses going forwards. And so next slide, please. I'd like to spend a couple of moments now going through in terms of setting the context for cyber transformation. So is next slide displaying? Just the check has just come through. Yeah, there we go. Thank you. So you'll see on screen here, this is sort of setting the context. On the left-hand side here, we've set out some of the the drivers here, some of the facts we're seeing, and this comes from both our work and our contacts with industry, but also working with the regulators. We work with a lot of the major FS regulators, and as you can see from the headlines here, digital leaders expect bigger, significant growth in the next 2 years, just as we talked about in the poll there in terms of the results. And I think what we're seeing is a significant shift away from cybersecurity, from sort of an audit and necessary cost, to looking at it as a strategic priority. It's interesting to look at the role of the CISO, and I'm sure many people will resonate with this. The role of the CISO has changed dramatically from that of being, as I say, an audit compliance sort of perspective, to actually understanding and being the bridge between perhaps the CIO and between the business in terms of looking at strategic direction, and how cyber can help enable that. How as we go into more digital ways of working, trust is absolutely essential in terms of the services we provide, and therefore it's really important that the CISO is having those high-level strategic discussions, and we're certainly seeing that in terms of the role that's changing and evolving around that, and some of the the board-level interactions that CISOs now have they would never have in the past. So again, in terms of this aspect of looking at it, is increasingly need to build trust. We're also seeing the boards themselves demanding more management information about this, and not just necessarily in the old ways about it. They're looking at ways in which digital revenue streams can be increased, can be enhanced by having greater trust. And I think, as we all know, we've seen through the trends that have happened through COVID, a greater adoption in terms of digital ways, digital payments, ways of doing that. I certainly these days hardly carry any cash with me. And contactless is a key part of that. And I think it's changed us as consumers and clients as how we work with that and with expectations. So, one CISO I talked to recently was saying that, in the past, the mantra was to reduce all friction out of the process of interactions also with customers or clients in terms of security. But now, actually, unless you get that two-factor authentication, perhaps on some transactions, you start to question, well, how secure is this transaction I'm involved in? So some of it is actually looking at putting a little bit of friction back into it to demonstrate actually we do take things seriously from a security point of view. So those are some of the trends on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, we'll talk to these a little bit more in depth as we go through the presentation today. I'll come on to drivers in a minute, but I think we'll talk about three key things, three key tenets around this. First of all, trusted systems. And obviously through the pandemic and through working at home, it's kind of undermined some of the existing ways we would connect with systems, the traditional ways through VPN and so forth. And zero trust, as we've all seen, has surged to the fore in this, in terms of making sure that we secure systems down only to accessible to those that need to have access to them for a period of time. They need to have access to that information or data they want. So we're certainly seeing the real emphasis on trusted systems and new models and ways in which we do that. Second point here is about ingenious processes. We need to look at how the process we put around cyber or cyber related to cyber, how do we support people? There's a huge amount of increasing sophistication of attack, and therefore tools and aids such as MI, for example, and machine learning can help in terms of helping the user in terms of that process they're working through, and call out things if they're strange or if there's odd behaviors. And finally, we talk about cyber savvy mindset. Again, it's how do we create that cultural change or transformation around cyber? And I think it's kind of characterized by some of the experiences we've had around health and safety. I worked for many years with BP, and for those that we know BP, it's absolutely ingrained the health and safety culture in everything they do. So whether it's putting a lid on a coffee cup or sitting on the edge of the desk, people call out those behaviors if you're seen to be doing something that is against their health and safety culture. And again, I think in the same way we're working with clients at the moment, getting to a point where they feel comfortable in calling out that behavior and looking out for one another in terms of what we talk about cyber savvy mindset. And Cate and Nicola will talk about that in a little while in more detail. So I hope that sort of sets the context for cyber transformation. If we can move to the next slide, please. So I mentioned about business drivers, and I think it's worthwhile reflecting on this, that, as I say, in the past, the drivers tend to come from externally in terms of the expectations as an organization you may have, either through being a customer or supplier in terms of supply chain and being audited and making sure you have good cybersecurity in place. But that the external drivers on the right-hand side here have multiplied. Regulation still is there, heavily there, but it's changed. If we look at what the FCA now expects, it's in terms of operational resilience, it's looking for you as organizations to identify your important business services, to look at your tolerances, to test against those. We've all known and loved GDPR, which has come in, which again has put greater emphasis and greater fines in place for not doing the right thing. In incidents, for example, they're often and more frequent now. And again, it's important to learn from those incidents. And again, what we pick up from that. And again, the sphere has changed. It also changes in terms of not just your employees and their working in your current environments, but it's also what your employees do on social media, because we've seen time and again exploits being made because people are careless in what they say on social media. We've talked about user demand. We've talked about things like two-factor authentication. And adversity strategy is important here, as well as to what your competitors do in the marketplace, but equally what they might not be doing as well. So some people have decided not to collect more personal information because of the risk, but that provides an opportunity for you as an organization to look at that and build greater trust. And then, of course, we've got on the left-hand side here, we have the traditional drivers, the business strategy we talked about, the desire to go to a much more digital way of working, the way the technology is evolving and absolutely creating new models, new ways of working, which again, from a cybersecurity point of view, in the rush to adopt those, security can be left behind. We know how difficult it is to tack security on after the event. Workforce strategy is an important part. We know that employees expect, or increasingly expect, that level of security. They see it in their personal life now. And then finally, two elements, perhaps again, that are perhaps increasingly important as we see: supply strategy, looking at third parties. And we're moving away, I think, from the annual audit to much more continuous monitoring. So how do you do that effectively when you've got a large supply base? And how do you make sure you're spotting the right risks and giving the information to senior management in the right way? And M&A, mergers and acquisitions or capital events, we're seeing a lot more, and we're doing a lot more work now. It's a case that you just look at the financial health of a company, but cyber is a fundamental health of that organization, especially in terms of how you've kept customer data in the past, where you've acquired it from. A lot of value is driven by that lifeblood of having that information. And if that's not being kept and managed in the right way in the past, that can eat away and erode some of the benefits of mergers and acquisitions or capital events that people are looking at. So hopefully that sort of set a sort of broad sort of level of the context and some of the drivers we see. And I'd now like to hand over to Nicola, who's going to talk a little bit about her experiences, may I be.
Thanks, Elliot. Yeah, so I suppose cyber is an enabler. It's a choice really that a CISO needs to be making in terms of actually how they want to engage with our organization. So Elliot is right in terms of that we are now set in a very different environment, and the CISO traditionally would have been a technology type role, whereas now it's becoming more and more a business driver type role. It's the type of role where you actually are that bridge in terms of technology and the organization. And for me, a lot of that is about getting behind the why of what the organization wants to actually achieve. So what is the ambition of the organization? How digitally connected do they want to be as an organization? And on the back of that, then what is required to ensure that actually that they're demonstrating it? Because actually it's a very valid point that Elliot is saying, is that people need to see a little bit of that friction, whether it's an employee or whether a customer, need to see a little bit of that friction. Now that friction doesn't have to be difficult friction. I mean, biometrics is a friction and it's a very easy thing to do, and massively enables actually how we work as interacting with technology and data, etc., that kind of thing. So for me, cyber is an enabler. It's very much about understanding the data that we hold, the privilege that we hold. So as banks, we hold a huge privilege in terms of actually the fact that we host a large consortium of data that's related to customers, whether it's personal customers or SMEs, and actually how rich that data can be. And then on the back of that data, what could happen to a customer if they lost that data? I mean, I know in the UK market, we're all faced at the moment with a lot of smishing campaigns and phishing campaigns. And that's where customers are unwittingly releasing knowledge that they have themselves, that they should only have themselves. They're releasing those to bad guys. And actually, the psychometrics associated with that are fascinating in terms of how willing people are to reveal some of that kind of stuff. So getting into that psychometric knowledge of actually how both customers and employees behave when they're put under pressure to release data and release information, and how can we get there and actually prevent that, and whether that's providing friction within the system, or whether that's providing, moving away from knowledge and more to biometrics and to possession when it comes to 2FA, etc., and that kind of thing. They're the types of things that we need to be working forward as CISOs. Part of that is obviously, once you understand the organizational strategy, there's very much a need to understand the technology strategy. So what are the enablers behind that organizational strategy that need to be delivered from a technology point of view? And then for a CISO, it's bringing that back and then turning that into capabilities. So I understand the strategy now, I understand where the organization wants to do. What now are the capabilities that as a CISO that I need to develop? And for us, that's very much, it's not something we will develop always in-house. So it's actually trying to create the right strategic partnerships in terms of those enablers, and making sure that from a capability point of view, though, they are relevant in terms of what we're trying to deliver from a strategy point of view. And lastly, then the fact that people is a differentiator. So that's people in terms of who you're hiring, how you're developing them, etc., and that kind of thing. But also it's the entire employee base. How do you make that entire employee base, back to that health and safety point of view, how do you make them alert? How do you make them aware? And how do you make sure that they are a differentiator for you going forward? Because they are the people that are stopping the immediate attacks. So they're the ones stopping the phishing attacks, the malware, etc., and that kind of thing, because they're so aware and so cognizant of the data that they're holding and how they're actually engaging with technology. Thanks, Elliot.
And thanks, Nicola, for that. This one thing I took away from what you've just said is creating strategic partnerships, and being able to translate your technology strategy and aligning that with your organizational strategy. Very, very important to note. Just before I hand over to Cate, I'd like to sort of send in the second poll question. Thanks to everyone who's again on this webinar. Please do send your questions in as they come in, as you think of them. We'll get to them just after the session is over, and I'll be posting the second poll question now. Cate, please, over to you.
Thanks, Huggy, and I'll ask you for the results of the poll question as they come in, because it's one of the things that we'll start picking up. So there is a slightly more full of detailed slide about to be displayed to you, and I will talk through the key elements of that over the next 10 minutes or so. Elliot spoke about the business drivers and the importance of aligning business and cyber strategy. And Nicola brought that to life with some of the things that AIB is doing to grow safely in the digital world, with cyber as an enabler to that. The three key areas that Elliot mentioned, I'll go into in a bit more detail. So systems that are secure by design, of course, this audience looked at that, it's obvious. Processes that encourage compliance rather than consent and evade, because we're all human. And that talks to some of the stuff that Nicola said around friction in the system and the right kind of friction in the system. And people with a cyber savvy mindset at both board level and employee level, as well as the technical cyber capability that you need in your information security teams. So what we've got in here and what we talk through in the report are some of the pragmatic and practical things that you can do in each of those areas. And I'll just run through briefly now some of those. So Elliot mentioned the trusted systems approach in secure by design. So not just treating security systems in isolation, but as Nicola said, making them part of how the business works, making them relevant to the people on the board who are making the decisions about how the business runs. So think about it in business services terms. That means thinking about what are the critical systems, what are those systems that look after your crown jewels, and what resilience do you need across the business to make sure those core processes can continue to run. This means, of course, you can focus investment, you can reduce risk, and you can start looking at how you use new technologies such as AI in rapid development in a safe way that means you can use them for customer data, for greater analysis, and building that into the way the business works and the way you help your clients. To do that, you also need, therefore, to have strong relationships with the business users. HR, finance, corporate, the market facing, the customer facing parts of the business as well, to give them confidence to use the systems and to get the whole benefit out of those, so that you're genuinely designing them so that they do what you need them to do for your customers. Part of that is about demystifying it for the non-techie users, because this isn't a techie thing. This is about making our businesses work better and grow in a digital world. And part of it is giving customers the tools that means that they can use those in the right way and they become familiar with them. So there might be some additional benefit to their family and the way that their family understands cybersecurity, for example. And then there's embedding that security in all aspects of systems delivery. So build it in early in the design, not as an afterthought, and make your system design more able to be agile and to continuously develop, so that you change faster, you meet the new technology opportunities and threats faster and get better value. So the report talked about 4 things to do. I said we'd have pragmatic things to do. Align with regulations, of course. Put the right cyber hygiene in place, so patching, the basics. But then also look at what you're doing in terms of testing and test the right things, and look firm-wide in the way you engineer the system, so that you're raising the business's understanding of what those systems can do for them, not encouraging them to look at it as it's just a technical solution or a technical worse problem. And the poll at the beginning showed that there were some of those real highlights coming out there. Before I go into processes, I'll ask Ogie for the results of that poll, please.
Definitely. So the question that we asked was, has your board taken more or less of an interest in cyber culture over the course of COVID? What we have is 17.2% have said a lot more interest, 54.8% of people have said more interest, and 28% have said about the same.
So a predominance of looking at, as we've all gone remote, we're all sitting at home in our studies or living rooms. As we've all gone remote, there's been much more interest in cybersecurity across the piece, and much more of a reliance on the technology and the communications and the internet that mean that we can have these kind of conversations now remotely. There's also an interesting move now where we're starting to see organisations look at what does the hybrid working of the future begin to offer. How do we get some of our people in the office, some of our people working from home, and how do we usefully blend that? So the fact that boards are taking more interest in this and therefore probably understand it better is really helpful to that. I'll take us into the processes piece now, and perhaps while we're doing that, Ogie, put the 3rd poll question up so that people can be answering that before we get into the mindset piece at the end, because the 3rd question is about the culture. So processes that encourage compliance is the 2nd topic. So this is about intuitive, fit for purpose processes that engage people in the right way and encourage them to do the right things. Now, some of that might be to make doing the wrong things harder. Some of it will be to make doing the right things easier. So there are 3 elements of this. Governance processes, so linking to growth, as Nicola and Elliot both said, linking to what is effective about your organisation, linking to the business strategy. Cybersecurity doesn't exist for its own good. It exists so that the business can do its job better, faster, safer. That means that these processes need to be easily understood and accessible to the board who are making decisions on this, and it should be part of the decision making at board level on a regular basis. Meaningful metrics that are things that they can use in that decision making and are intuitive to them. So therefore are in board language, so that when the board sees the dashboard of risks and decisions that it needs to make choices based on, it's easy for them to understand what the opportunities of digital transformation and digital routes to market are, and what it needs to do in terms of cyber security and transformation to support that. And that also means that you need to integrate those processes and have the integration processes that bring that technology and the business together. So technology integration, a key to that is having a coherent technology architecture and aligning that to the growth ambition. So having an architecture that's aligned to yesterday's way of doing things is better than nothing, but it's not going to help you make the changes that you want to go digital, to introduce new services, to change the way the business works. And then the third party integration, and Elliot mentioned supply chain right at the beginning, that trust in the supply chain, the importance that your organization places on cybersecurity needs to flow down to the supply chain. You need to be able to trust your suppliers that they think it's as important as you do, and they treat it with the same level of care and attention and respect as you do, so that they've built the cybersecurity into their systems. We've seen plenty of examples of the supply chain letting out information that they had been given by the prime contractor, for example, and it's still a reputational damage to the prime contractor. That's the way things flow. The third part of the process piece is around accreditation and certification, and that builds up the trust, it builds up the confidence, and the key thing here, regulation in this industry is essential, of course, is to keep up to date and make it a differentiator. So the fact that we have NIST, ISO, financial services sector, cybersecurity profiles, all those things go towards improving the reputation of your organizations and giving confidence to customers and consumers that they are using the right, they're making the right choices in who they bank with, who they work with, where they get insurance from, etc. And that's what keeps you or loses you customers in the long run. So the pragmatic to do things in here, make sure that cybersecurity is a board agenda item, review the integration that you've got in place, and particularly that forward-facing technology architecture. Align to firm-wide policies, back to that align with the business. This is all about helping the business work better. And be visible as a cybersecurity team. So make the cybersecurity team approachable, helpful, and part of that solution and the way forward. Ergi, can we look at the responses to the third poll question, please?
Definitely. So we asked the question, how developed is the cyber culture in your organization? And we have about 2% of people saying not developed. We have 5% saying identified as of interest but not underway. We have 40% saying identified and program underway. And we have 22% saying program maturing and benefits realized. And finally, we have 29% saying already in place. So
that's brilliant. And it's interesting. And when I talk to other industries, I don't know whether you'll be pleased to hear this or not. When I talk to other industries, I always say financial services and the financial sector are some of the leaders in cybersecurity. And I think that's because the right level of attention is paid to it, and that cyber culture has started to be embedded in the organizational culture in a way that it hasn't in many sectors. So I'll ask us now to go on to the last slide, please. And I'll talk about the cyber savvy mindset and cybersecure culture. So the idea behind this and the mindset piece, that cultural element, is the newest but probably the fastest emerging part of the cyber arsenal, if you want to think it that way. So it brings the whole organization together to look for growth opportunities, for cybersecurity to be in the right place, and to create a workforce that takes pride in the fact that it's good at cybersecurity. Nicola talked about the health and safety parallels. If you look at what health and safety was doing 20 years ago, that's kind of where cyber is now. We need it to move to that point, and it will do much faster than health and safety did, of being second nature. People are naturally the most adaptable asset we have, but they are also the highest risk. So there are a lot of things that you can do both for the board and the workforce, but also to get the cyber talent into your team. And I'll talk a bit about each of those. You can see some of those highlighted on here. So the culture, and this needs to be led from the top. The culture needs to empower employees to take responsibility for their own cyber hygiene, and to help each other to be good at cybersecurity. That comes, of course, from the training and onboarding, alertness that then instills in each of the individuals, and fundamentally, as I said before, the leadership need to live it and do this by second nature, so that they are the example to the rest of the organisation. If they don't do that, then they'll undermine all the other good work that's being done. So this is about building confidence in the workforce, that they know what they need to do and how they need to do it, and hence empowering them to do the right thing. And there are various interesting ways that you can now start doing this. So cyber nudges, for example, that rather than relying on the once a year training that everybody does at 5 o'clock on a Friday just before the deadline and then forgets, put nudges into the systems that help remind people to do the right thing. They won't be deliberately doing the wrong thing in the majority of cases. They will be doing it because they've forgotten or because they're in a rush. And particularly where we've got a plethora of social media, smishing, phishing, largely based on current events and really quite tempting to click on, those nudges really help to be in the system. You can also, if you do that, start collecting data around where your areas of weakness are. So which areas do you need to improve? What are the behaviours that you see in your workforce? Where do you need to target the remediation? So you end up with quite a rich pool of data that you can then use to get the most out of the investment you're going to put into nudges or training or leadership statements. That also means that you can start to say more in your branding, your messaging to customers about what it is that you stand for as an organisation, and that this is really important to you. You value their data, you value them as customers. So you can then build up a well-coordinated response, and it needs to be really quite immediate in a world of social media. You need within usually minutes, certainly hours, to have gone out on very little detail and said, this is what we know, this is what we don't know, this is what we're doing at the moment. So you can start to coordinate that response and build that trust with customers, and use those things, prepared messages, planning, practice, to exercise both your board and your security team. When the Houses of Parliament had their attack probably 3 or 4 years ago now, the reason that they managed to respond to it, because it was a slow build-up thing and they couldn't quite tell whether it was something wrong with the technology or whether it was an attack, and it was actually a DDoS in the end. They had planned, they had practiced, and they were then able to put that into operation. And having that takes us onto the cyber talent, the cyber team. Having that in place means that you've got confidence also in the cyber team that you've got. So this means you can work out what you want to have internally as your skills, what you want to outsource, what partnerships you want to put in place to provide that ability to stay up to date. It also means that you can start looking at what skills you need and where you get them from. And it doesn't always have to be from the standard STEM skill set that we have traditionally looked for. We've done some work with MOD and other organisations on where they've got some of their quite technical cyber capabilities from, and whether there's an aptitude way of looking at it. So are people curious? Do they have the right mindset? Do they go about problem solving in the right way to be able to work effectively in cybersecurity? And they have gone through a retraining course now, and found that, yes, absolutely, if you've got that mindset, it doesn't matter that when you were 18 you didn't necessarily do STEM. They've got firefighters and a beautician, my personal favourite, who are some of their best coders and cyber response people. So there are new and different ways of looking at this now, so that we know it's a scarce skill set. Let's expand that pool. So again, the to-dos for this, the pragmatic things, put cyber nudges into the system. Look at the skills gap you've got, but look at it innovatively. What do you need in terms of cyber techies, cyber translators? Can you look differently at the pool you're drawing from? Build in meaningful metrics that you can then use as part of your messaging, and exercise, because you don't want the first time that you have to come up with those answers being when you've got to go live on Twitter with it. I'm going to stop there because I've spoken quite enough and hand back to Ogie.
Thanks, Cate. Really appreciate everyone who has spoken, Nicola, Elliot, and yourself. This has been a very insightful discussion. We've looked at not just the technical side of cyber transformation. We've also looked at cyber as an enabler, looking at your business strategy and your technology strategy. And now we've talked about the cultural piece of it and how you instill that cyber savvy mindset. Really appreciate it. We are receiving questions coming in from the audience, so I would really like us to get through as many of these as possible. But please do keep your questions coming in. I will get to as many as we can in the time that we have left. But I would like to start with a question for Elliot. You talked about business drivers and especially the digital ways of working that we are seeing, especially as we're coming out of COVID. What are the key factors that have changed in the cybersecurity landscape as we have continue to emerge from the COVID-19?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ogie. I think one of the things we're seeing, and we've all got used to this new way of working largely from home. And I think one of the things that will change as a factor, and it's obviously attackers will look to exploit anything that's disruptive. And I think one of the key factors that come out of COVID is the balanced way, a new way of working we're going to have. So, I'm pretty sure we're all not going to go back to the old ways of working where we're all working in the office, but there'll be some sort of mixed mode of operating. And when you've got some sort of mixed mode of operating where you've got some people working from home, some people working in the office, it does cause a sort of a boundary of confusion around that in terms of systems you're using, exchanging information, greater share of information across corporate and working at home systems. So I think that one of the concerns I've got is the cultural guard being up in terms of actually that new way of working and the way that people will tend to try and exploit that from an attacker's point of view, either it being through social media. So people need to be really careful about what they're posting on social media about how they're working that mixed mode operating, where some of the time's in the office, some of the time at home. And just thinking through that in terms of how you're going to transition to that. So I think that's one of the things that worries me a bit, and it's certainly worrying our clients is as we go in terms of this, say working between two norms we've got ourselves established with, that people's guard can drop. So that's one of my key things I see in the marketplace and concerns at the moment.
Thanks, Elliot. Another question, and this one goes to Cate. How are organizations starting to recognize and address people challenges around cyber as part of their transformation?
A really good question. Thanks, Ogie. Yeah, we're starting to see as part of the digital transformation that a lot of organizations are going through. So the board has a brilliant idea, bright idea. We're going to go in this direction. Sends it to digital transformation or the CIO, and then it becomes actually we need the cybersecurity part of that as well. So we're seeing much more that join together of digital transformation and cyber transformation, and a recognition that the cyber culture in your organisation, and NCSC, National Cybersecurity Centre, are just doing some research on this at the moment. We're starting to see that those organisations that have a more mature approach to risk, so are less risk averse in that sense, are more agile in the way they think, lowercase a, so they are happier to fail fast, they are interested in rapid iteration, and that start to bring that mindset in, and that sort of trust and safe environment are much faster at picking up a good cybersecurity culture. So we're starting to see that being asked for both by government and private sector. I do a lot of work with government around how do you make it second nature for people to do the right thing, and how do you create that environment where they help each other to continue to do that. So we're starting to see it become much more part of what the organisation does, how it sets itself up, and the values and beliefs that underpin the way it works and the way it uses data, particularly as we've looked at things like medical data through COVID.
Thanks, Cate. I have another question, and this one is going to Nicola. You talked about understanding organizational strategy and then understanding your technology strategy at the same time. My question is, how do you make cyber an interesting topic for your C-suite executives? And perhaps further down, how do you match the ambition of your cyber strategy to that of the business itself?
Thanks, Augie. So it's all, for me, again, it's back to actually understanding the why. So I look at banks at the moment, and I mean, they're capital rich. They need to actually understand what they're going to use that capital for, albeit that they have to still sit within the requirements that are driven from the regulatory point of view. So that's going to drive them into starting to think about acquisitions or to thinking about developments in terms of their digital transformation, etc., and that kind of thing, and exploiting what Elliot has described in terms of the new world that we're working in. But they can't do that without necessarily understanding the risks that they're falling into. And that risk adverse or risk positive kind of position, as Cate has articulated, it's important for us as CISOs to understand what appetite the organization wants to actually work within. Notwithstanding that appetite associated with the loss of data obviously is incredibly low. But it's actually, where do they want to fail fast? Where do they want to introduce new capability, new transformational capability for customers, but that they don't want to risk any of their trust that they've built up as reputable banks and reputable financial institutions. So it's a balance between all of those, right? So for me, it's back to understanding the business propositions, understanding where does the business want to actually move to, and then translating that into capabilities. Take the technology conversation out of it. To be honest with you, none of these people want to actually have a conversation in terms of technology. They want to have a conversation in terms of capability. They want to translate that business capability into transformational differentiators that they can use, that they can bring to the market, that makes that they can seem a little bit different, or they can offer something to the customer that's innovative in such a way that actually it's aligned to what the customer needs are at that point in time.
Thanks, Nicola. I'll sort of remain with you on this one. I've got another question coming in for you. Is fintech and open banking the only way to make change happen? Are legacy banks just too slow to change to make a difference?
I hope not. Working in a bank that has been around for quite some time as well myself. No, I think fintech has been interesting. I think it's driven us in terms of actually bringing security to the forefront. So SCA and multi-factor authentication and all of that has been really positive in terms of the security journey. But what it has done is opened up, I think, again, I suppose our colleagues in the business front to start thinking about the fact that what is the license to play here. So SCA and open banking is only the license to play. The next step we need to actually make is actually translate that into business drivers that we want to use ourselves as organizations. I mean, do we want to use APIs and open banking to our own advantage? And if we're doing that, how can we do that in terms of data aggregation and do that in a safe and a secure way from a customer point of view? So it's to go back into that kind of space of saying that while we're being driven in a certain direction, how can we align that with our overall strategy that we want to do as an organization and make best benefit out of both? And I firmly believe that actually you can do both. So while you're lifting the lid in terms of what's required from a regulatory point of view, you can also do really innovative things in terms of the customer proposition.
Thanks, Nicola. And the next question, I'll send this to Cate. What does the future of cyber transformation look like?
Thanks, Augie. Really good question. And there's another one that's come in saying on bricks and mortar versus an online challenger. I think the future of cyber transformation is absolutely tied up with the future of digital transformation. If we, as an industry, are going to make best use of the new technologies that are available, be that AI and machine learning, or new technologies for communication, or new ways that our customers want to work, we need to be using cyber to make sure that's done in a safe way, and we can be really, really fast at picking some of those things up. But that's why cyber is so important. We need to be able to iterate that at a pace that means we can stay up with technology, which has a half-life of months in some cases if we're lucky, and make best use of that so that the UK stays ahead of the game in terms of what we're doing in the global financial sector. Not just finance, of course, but as I said before, the financial sector does tend to be the leader in this.
Thanks, Cate. And your response sort of also covered the second question, which was around the difference between bricks and mortar and online challenger banks with regards to cyber transformation. So I'll stay with you on this one. We talked about the rise in hybrid ways of working following the impact of COVID. From a culture standpoint, how does this potentially, or how would it potentially impact on your cyber culture or an organization's cyber culture?
I think it does two things. One, in some ways, it makes it easier to put cyber further up the agenda. Everybody now recognises how important it is to have a decent broadband connection and to have to know that that is going to be there when you need it, but also that you can transfer information securely. The hybrid piece, I think, will also create, and we're doing some work on this at the moment, will also create an interesting need to rebalance what we expect to do in an office versus what we expect to do from anywhere else. So we now know meetings don't need to be in an office. We do all, however, as human beings, have a certain hankering to be with other people. And certainly when you're workshopping with a whiteboard or whatever to get through new ideas and new ways of doing things, it's helpful to be in one place. So having the right technology that means that you can have people remotely, have people physically there, is going to be really important so that we end up with people working as effectively as they can, but not going back to being in the office the whole time. On our recent Women in Cyber event, we ran a poll of basically how much do you want to be back in the office, how many days a week. 70% of people 2 to 3 days a week would be just fine in the office for them, thank you very much. So how do we make that work, and how can cyber technology be a part of that, as Nicola said, as an enabler, so that we can give people access to the information they need, the colleagues they want to work with, and the ability to do that both in the office and from wherever they happen to be working.
Thanks, Cate. And Elliot, I would like to get your thoughts and input on the question. Can you describe if the approach to cyber transformation might differ between an established bricks and mortar bank and an online challenger?
Yeah, thanks, Ogie. And again, just my thoughts around this. I mean, again, traditional banks are very good at control and governance. There's the structures in place there to manage and govern things. In terms of transformation, in terms of changing culture and changing processes, there's often good change management discipline and process change in that. But there can be a deep-seated culture. So sometimes, in terms of transformation, it can be easier to make systems and process changes and be rigorous about those. It can be a little bit different to make the cultural shift, which is what we've seen. And we Cate and I work with a number of organisations. We deploy a number of tools around looking at cyber nudges and baselining cyber culture and how you change to it. The other thing is that people say, well, it's great going to an online one because you start from a blank sheet of paper. But often people in an online environment, a new startup effectively coming to us as a challenger, and we work a lot with a lot of the challenger banks, is that they struggle a little bit in terms of having that rigor and control and discipline, and it can get carried away a little bit in terms of chasing the business objective, and looking at how technology can enable things, and not necessarily thinking about why certain checks and balances have always been in place, why they need to be there, why sometimes you had in the old world of 2 pairs of eyes that would look over a financial document for sign off. In the new digital world, you might have to put something in place that replicates that as well. So whilst it's great in a new environment to be able to make change happen and set your own culture, I would argue sometimes that I've seen a little bit of lack of discipline and governance or rigor around that. So I think there are differences of approach that we do see in both those organisations, and both have their pros and cons around that. But I think you just need to be aware of some of the strengths and some of the weaknesses, and that does, in my mind, I've seen it, means it's a different approach to the transformation you take in both those typical types of organisations.
Thanks, Elliot, and thanks for your response there. We have gone through all of the questions that we've received from our audience. And if there's nothing else, I would like to thank you all for joining us today, and especially for all of your questions and responses again from our expert panel. And as a summary, this regulatory roadmap technical briefings are taking place every day on a variety of topics. So please do take part in any that are relevant to your role and recommend them to your colleagues. UK Finance members and associate members are welcome to take part in as many sessions as you like, and the full schedule can be found on ukfinance.org.uk. Thanks for today. This has been really insightful. I have personally learned a lot around what we're going with, cyber transformation, digital ways of working, and how, again, we bring in that cyber piece into our organizational structure, our strategy for now and for the future. I hope you can join us for our next session, and that takes place today at 4 p.m. Thank you all again, and have a wonderful day.
Thanks.